Good morning, good afternoon to all our audience. Our episode today is not in Spanish, but we will do a recap on Spanish. So don't worry if this is a barrier for you. We're
Why is
gonna.
that?
Sorry.
Why is that? Why the
Because
change? The sudden change?
we just swapped to English because we have an amazing invitee for today. Kelsey Hightower is here with us. Hi, Kelsey.
Hey, how you doing? And it's funny, my wife, she used to be a Spanish teacher. She speaks Spanish fluently, and this would be the occasion she will remind me that she tried to teach me Spanish years ago, and it would have came in really handy today if I would have just learned it.
At least can you ask for a beer?
No,
No way.
I'm just
That's the
afraid to
basic
embarrass
Spanish.
myself. I'm just in embarrassing. I just don't want to embarrass myself, so I don't even try.
I think everyone should at least know to say una cerveza, por favor, and ¿dónde está el baño? That
And what
is
are
a beer, one beer or a beer, please. And where's the bathroom?
All right, I probably
I
can use
think
the
those are the
bathroom. I
most
can use the
basic
bathroom one. I don't drink, so me asking for a beer, I don't know what I'm gonna get.
things.
Okay. Kelsey, as we were talking just before, we met with Diego on the community in Colombia. We were building, or Diego was building a cloud community and a developer community in Colombia. And I hop on that community, and that's where we met. And we have followed you through the years since you were like very strong on the Python community, and then you moved to the Kubernetes community. And I think that's the first question that I would like to address to you. How was that swap from that community, from that Python that was already strong? You were already like a very renowned name there. And how was that movement to Kubernetes, and what took you to take that jump?
So wow, when you said the Python community, that's how I know you know who I am, because that's exactly where I started. And there was a few communities in between Python and Kubernetes, and we can touch on those in that transition. But what's important is, regardless of the technology, I know we're talking about Python and Kubernetes in this context, but the community part where the humans kind of get together and we help each other, we learn all these skills. And the Python community was the very first time that I learned how to do public speaking, where I learned how to find peers outside of work and learn things from other people. That's what the Python community represents for me. So I was in Atlanta, and the very first meetup I've ever went to was a Python meetup at Georgia Tech, one of the universities there. And I was watching people talk about Python, the libraries, and these things. And I was with one of my colleagues because we were using Python at work, and we just wanted to get better at our particular craft because I'm self-taught. And I was watching these people speak and say, you know what? Next week, I'm going to try to give a talk. And I remember trying to look super smart, and I gave a talk about um, Python list comprehensions versus Haskell list comprehensions, right? Because Python list comprehensions are based on what you see in the Haskell world. And I remember feeling really good preparing for the talk and nervous to give the talk. And I remember when I gave that talk, then I understood what community was about. People just listening, people giving you feedback, and then me really feeling that I'm a part of a broader technology world than outside of the place where I earn my paycheck. So I just wanted to go into like, that's what community means to me. And then maybe we can dive into the details of just like going from giving a talk to becoming a contributor. I started contributing to Python. Virtual Env and Pip were the first two places where I was contributing code. I went to a Python conference, PyCon Atlanta. And there I was just one of those hack rooms where we were just working on Virtual Env. We were working on trying to bring Pip into the standard library instead of it being a separate tool. And that was really like the final straw for me to understand what it's like to be a contributor.
And how did you did that jump? Like you started giving the talks, and how did you start like being a contributor? Like which was that main like middle part that you feel in order to become a contributor?
Yeah, so I was introduced to the community by speaking and meetups. But then I remember going to PyCon for the first time. And after the conference, there's this like hack week. Like you spend like another 5 days in this room, and Guido is there, all the core maintainers across the libraries that I was using, the books that I bought and read about Python, the authors were there. Everyone's just in this same room. And I remember people were saying, if you want to hack on something, the various tables you could hack on things. And I was very familiar with package management. I wanted it to be better. Like in the Python world, we're using eggs, and there's just so many things, disutils, there's just so much going on that I wanted to try to help make it better versus complaining. And I remember sitting down and people were like, hey, we'll help you get set up. We'll get you all signed up as a Python developer, helping me contribute code. And that's when I was like, wow, I can actually make my tools better. So that introductory at a conference where a lot of the people who had the skills, knew how to get contributions made and accepted, really walked me through what it's like to become a contributor. So I became one.
Okay. Yeah, well, like recently we launched an event here in Mexico, and we want to start to replicate it all over Latin America. That it's an event, we take people from different projects, and we try to help developers in as contributors. And we're trying to push that environment here. We're not feeling that same track on the company side. Like the companies that hire these developers, I feel that Latin America hasn't understood the power of having a developer that it's also a contributor in a project like this. If there are several of my clients that listen to this podcast, and I would really appreciate if they can hear it from you. Like, if you own a company, what do you get if your developers are actually working and contributing to these open source projects?
Yeah, so I think there was a world, and it's still true today, where you call a vendor and you buy the product, right? So you buy a product, maybe you pay $1,000. And then what you get is exactly what it says it does, or hopefully it does what it says it does. And then if you want anything else, then you call the vendor and you ask them to somehow find the priority to make that thing better or integrate it with this other thing. Okay. So that's just the relationship that I think a lot of people are very used to. But then you hire someone, and now you have a new way of working if you want it, which is this idea that you can actually contribute, because a lot of the tools we're buying these days are either open source or sometimes have an open source component or even an open API component. And in that case, having the people who work for you be able to help make the tools better, it's like hiring an expert for a fraction of the cost to give you priority on how those tools work, because a lot of innovation comes from taking off-the-shelf tools, not necessarily buying them, and then making them slightly better to fit your needs. I mean, this is like a dream come true, that you can almost get this for free if you hire the people who are motivated to go out and do this work. And guess what? In those communities, this is where you're going to find your next hire, the next person who can help make your business more competitive. So it's almost this world where, and I've ran a company before, a very small computer company, and the hardest thing is to get people to be better every day. And a lot of times you just don't have enough work internally to motivate someone to grow every day. So these communities are a nice option for them to grow, expand, maybe even put your business on the map by being a representative. And it's a good way to give back to the overall technology world and not just be a consumer, but also a producer of some technologies.
Nice. Thank you. I think that would be a very good talk in a conference. Just expand that idea that you just explained. Well, another, I don't know if you have more questions about communities, Diego, if you want to dive here.
Yeah, you mentioned that these Python communities that you were a member of were really helpful in your process, right? So I was just wanting to know, what are your thoughts on how to create or make a community as welcoming as the ones that you have experienced with?
You know what? You need leadership in everything you do. So if you're running a business, good leadership usually helps create a successful business. The same is true for communities, right? Because what vibe do you want to create? For example, if you owned a nightclub, the music you play, the things that are on the menu, the dance floor and how big it is, the security, you're creating an environment, and that requires curation. So people know when they come there, they're going to have a certain experience. You have to do the same thing with the community. For example, in the Kubernetes community, I tried to do a good job where sometimes I remember when Kubernetes was starting to rise in popularity, some people would say, hey, look, Kubernetes is better than Swarm or better than Mesos. And what you have to do, without publicly shaming people, you have to say, look, that's not what we're here for, right? I have this idea of different companies, same team. So when you're in the community, you have to show good leadership where we don't try to bring another community down for the sake of ours. When you see something bad happening in the community, for example, I was sitting at a lunch table at a conference and someone came up and said, hey, I'm a big fan of yours. Could you sign my book? And they had a few questions for me. And there was a person next to me. He said, oh, look, there's one of your groupies. And I had to correct that person and say, hey, she's not a groupie. She didn't identify herself as a groupie. Let's not do that. And I tried to do it in a way that was, I wanted the person to learn. I didn't want to publicly shame the person, but I wanted him to learn that when I say community, we welcome everyone. We need everyone to have a good experience, even when no one is looking.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think one of the biggest things that I could say about Kelsey is that how you address all your talks in order to fill a gap that you understand on the field, that you see in the industry. And it's something that I have seen on your talks over the time. I still remember one talk, one demo that you gave on PyCon, and you were talking, and just before the demo started, you did a disclaimer and you said like, and please start using Python 3, stop using 2.7. And in that moment, I was actually deploying a new version of a side project that it was in 2.7. And I was like, man, I need to stop this pull request that I'm gonna do, because that, and this is for me, this is why you have been so popular inside the community, and it's because you address everything on behalf of the community, on the requirements that you see on the industry, and not just on your profile or your ego or your something that you want from yourself, like to show. I know that you have in your toolbox many things to show, but you see the gaps that you are seeing right now in the community, and that's how you address the talks. And that's something that I really appreciate, and I just want to thank about. I wanted to talk a little bit about your keynote on KubeCon, because it was transgressing. Like, first of all, you didn't use any slides. You just came up and opened your heart. Like, just before I do the recap, how did you feel about your talk when you finish it?
I don't know how I felt because I was so nervous. So there's a couple of things. That was probably the first time that I didn't have any helpers, no speaker notes, no demo, no slides. I haven't used slides in a very long time, so I'm kind of used to that part. But usually when you have a demo, then you have something to lean on and you have some place for the story to go. But when you have to just talk with nothing, just you, the stage, and nothing else, then you have to rely on a whole bunch of things and you feel way more vulnerable. I have nothing cool to show other than what I'm saying. So since I've never done that before, I've never given that talk before, I really didn't have what words to say. I had an idea of the theme, and some things were made up on the fly, meaning I had to just recall from memory and just slow down a little bit to make sure that I was able to take what was in my mind and give it to the audience. And I will tell you, the other thing that I thought was super powerful was the audience itself. A lot of people don't think about it. A talk is a relationship between the speaker and the audience. So having 10,000 plus people sitting out there looking at you. And then we got to a point in the talk very early on, and I was describing one of my demos breaking, and I said I could literally hear the music stop. And they cut the music that was playing underneath my words, and everyone was just silent, waiting for the next thing. And it's 10,000 people silent at the same time. And I will look out. I saw familiar faces. I saw new faces. but I didn't see anyone using any technology. They were just leaning, waiting for the next thing. And that's when I knew that this was going to be a much different discussion or talk that I've ever given.
Nice. Yeah, like Kelsey, one of the biggest things that you address on that talk, or one of the conclusion was that Kubernetes became that island where you don't lean on the logo that of your badge. It's an island that we have all together and we share. And I feel that KubeCon has becoming that conference where you can go and talk with your friends from other companies, and it doesn't matter with the color that you have. You just care about how Kubernetes is growing and how we can all like feed our companies with this knowledge. Uh, Now I'm going to start talking a little bit more about the technology side, and it's on the hot the buzzword on this conference was serverless. Everyone was talking about Knative, how we should address Knative. If the Fargate that they just launched a couple of days before in AWS, in the conference about AWS, it's gonna be the way to go, or if it's gonna be Knative. Like I don't want to go deep on the technical side, but how do you sense these projections of doing serverless inside Kubernetes? How do you feel, or how do you feel that the project's going? Do you feel that Knative is going on the right way? Should we turn it, or should we like pivot a little bit? How do you feel that this buzzword thing that's going on serverless?
So I think to really kind of understand serverless, so serverless is a goal, this goal that we can hide infrastructure as much as possible. So good examples of serverless stuff that we don't really talk about today, for most people, email is serverless. You open a browser, you craft the email, and you send it to some people, and they get it. And in that case, we don't really even think about server capacity, how much storage space I have to do these things. You just don't even think about it. So that's that serverless philosophy. So what we're trying to do now is figure out, how do we take the ability to craft our own serverless experiences, right? So if you're using a cloud provider, like if you're in Google Cloud, for example, you can use Cloud Functions or Cloud Run, or even the App Engine that a lot of people are using today. That will give you a serverless kind of compute substrate. Now, let's say you're in charge of building your own serverless platform, whether that's on-premise, maybe you're another cloud provider, you just want to have something that's a little bit more open and more consistent, then that's where Knative comes in. But I think a lot of people have to step back. For example, I know someone that kind of works on freeways. And if you ask, like in the United States of America, there's over 164,000 miles of freeway. And the people who work on freeways and bridges and pave them and get the lines just right, there's very few people in terms of the general population that know how to do that. The rest of us, myself included, we just drive cars on the freeway. I don't even think about how to build the freeway. That's the mentality that the Kubernetes community is trying to take. So now you got to ask yourself, what side of the fence are you on? So at KubeCon, we are the people responsible for building infrastructure. So it makes sense that we talk about these low-level details such as Kubernetes. Kubernetes API is a little bit too big, maybe. So Knative comes along and tries to give us a serverless-like API. So for those that are new to Knative, that would be things like how to think about eventing, how to think about per request auto scaling. So when a request comes in, it will then create your apps and deployments on the fly, and then give you some higher level things to think about to get you closer to this serverless mentality. But here's the truth. If you are in charge of the cluster, you are not serverless. You are the cluster person, right? You're literally dealing with servers, and that's okay. Your role is to provide a serverless environment. So the people on the other side, just like the person driving the car on the freeway, doesn't have to think about Kubernetes. So if you can make Kubernetes disappear. So the big theme to me when it comes to Kubernetes and serverless, how do we make Kubernetes disappear to the point where people that are using Kubernetes don't even know that they are?
Brilliant, brilliant. And how do you feel it, and I mean, Knative has been like one of those projects that everyone's proud of, especially because of the pace that the project it has right now. But I feel that the industry is understanding Knative one as a prototyping tool for a Kubernetes regular environment. And I have felt that there is something that it's happening that we're missing. Like you can spin your environment on a Knative environment and have it like connected with Istio, but when you move it to a Kubernetes regular without Knative including, you need to redo all your networking that you did on Istio with Knative. And that's something that I have felt that we're going to start seeing tools to migrate Istio environments. That's my view. I feel that that's the next step on that. I don't know. I just wanted to see your input on how do you feel on that.
No, so if you think about what platforms are, they represent the collection of decisions you make at the infrastructure layer and then the resulting API that you present. So when some people say Knative, yeah, they need to describe more. Knative on what version of Kubernetes? Are you using Istio or are you using something else? By time you tell me all the things in that stack, then that just becomes a unique offering that happens to include Knative, because Knative isn't broad enough to tell you about everything underneath it. Are we talking about Knative on Windows? Are we talking about Knative with gvisor? There's way more details that go into this, and this is what we mean by sometimes a platform leaks up. Like, for example, if you're using a lot of the Knative advanced networking features that require something like Envoy or Istio, when you remove those two components, Knative doesn't stand alone. So then you start to say, well, can you really build this platform without Istio or one of these other components that can be dropped in as a replacement to Istio? So I think when we start to think about this is, when we say Cloud Run, you can expect it to work a certain way. When you say GKE, you also get some expectations. Or when you say App Engine. But when you say Knative, that's like saying TCP. Are we talking? Yeah, it's just too low of a protocol layer. It's not really a platform by itself.
And do you think we're gonna start standardize that combo on Knative? Or
so Google standardization of that combo is called Cloud Run.
yeah.
Right. So that combo is Cloud Run. If you work on premise at your company, you're gonna pick like. So here's the thing: people want all of these parts to be interchangeable. So while the API will be consistent, then if someone implements the entire Knative API, then you're right. They're going to have something like Istio, because without it, then the Knative API doesn't work. So that's the standardization level. So what Knative community is going to have to do and keep doing is standardize as much as they can in the Knative contract itself. So Knative says things like, you can have weights of a amount of traffic that goes to one revision of a service or another service. I can implement that with Nginx if I really wanted to, right? So it's up to you to decide what components can fulfill the contract. So Knative is the contract, not necessarily Istio. It's one way of fulfilling the contract.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that leads me to my next question, and it would be how do you feel about projects that are using Kubernetes but are actually using a fork on the project and make it like closed or not as open as you can? So they actually made a lock-in using Kubernetes, and there are several companies that are doing that right now. And well, for me, if you ask me, that you're losing all the pros of using Kubernetes if you go to a Kubernetes flavor that gives you a lock-in. But
so here's
you on that?
When it comes to lock-in, the power of open is that we empower people to lock it if they wanted to. You remove the ability to lock it, then it ain't open, right? Like, language is open. I can write a book and charge you for the book. So I've taken an open set of words, concepts, sentences, paragraphs, and I will lock you into my thoughts via my book. Is that a bad thing? That's a proprietary book at this point. So I think, remember, Kubernetes to me is just a tool. You can leverage it. So instead of building Kubernetes from scratch, you can take it as is. And if you want to build a proprietary platform on top, then you have to deal with the nature of, can I attract customers to a project that isn't open? Some customers want a project that's closed. Some people really want you to do things that the entire industry won't agree with, right? There's kernel extensions that are there just for FIPS compliant, right? So these high federal security standards that will never probably be merged in the very core of Linux. But does that mean we should not do them? Now, those are not necessarily proprietary or closed, but it just represents the ability for someone to start with the layer and then lock it down. Now, if you don't get any customers, maybe it's because it's closed or because it's different. There are some values of saying we can all do it the same way. But at Google, for example, when I meet customers, the very first thing they say, how are you different? Right? If I say, hey, everybody's the same, then why would I take your Kubernetes cluster versus this other Kubernetes cluster? So some people will always ask us, what is the value? I eat at certain restaurants because it tastes better than the other restaurant. If everyone served the exact menu with the same taste, what's the point? So the value to me, and a lot of times when I talk about this component of value, sometimes you create value by making people pay for something. So to me, there's a bit of gray area around this. So Kubernetes, and a lot of times even the people that have proprietary systems contribute back significantly. We just don't see it because they don't make a bunch of noise, but there are people in there contributing to this community and we should welcome them.
Okay. I want to swap a little bit on another concept that you explained or posed in the past few months, and it's configuration as data. Like for me, it was kind of transgressor, that concept, that I always thought that configuration and all this way of defining your infrastructure should be taken as code, and with testing as code. And when you start talking about data pipelines for your configuration, for me it was like mind-blowing. And to be honest, I don't finishly understand it, and I wanted to hear from you like an intro so we can start working on that on our communities.
So think about it this way. I used to work at Puppet Labs, right? So this is a configuration management company, probably around 2011, 2012. And I was coming from a world like most people where you're writing bash scripts, right? Shell code, for loops, and you're trying to automate things. So when we started to think about infrastructure as code, we were like, we should be automating things. We shouldn't just do infrastructure ad hoc and everybody's doing random things. If we can turn the process into code, then we have the foundation for automation. This is good, period. This is a great thing. Now, you do this long enough, you're going to have the exact same problems as you have with code itself. You have to unit test it, version it, check it in, security vulnerabilities in the code itself, right? There were plenty of security issues that I found in configuration management tools, where the configuration management tool is the thing causing you problems. So anytime you start to represent code, that's what happens. Now, here's the problem with it, not necessarily a bad thing, though. I want to be very clear to people. This isn't that one is better than the other. When you write a bunch of code and the code is the API, then you have people doing weird things like for loops. You got to have language parsers. So if I write a script in Python, I can't necessarily use another tool to deal with that code. You got to know Python, spike code, and all of this stuff to deal with it. Now, when you start to treat infrastructure as data, I'm going to be very concrete here. If I take all of this infrastructure code, like the way Kubernetes does, and I move it into a controller. So the controller is where all the if statements live, if Red Hat, if Ubuntu, do this, do that. Hey, that has to live somewhere. Now, what we're going to force ourselves to do is say, now that that code is in a controller, a loop, state machine, now I'm going to expose an API that has no language semantics at all, only data. So all you can do now is say, I want 3 of these things deployed. I'm not saying if it's Wednesday, I want 3. I can do things like declare that I want 3, when, the wind field and make it a day, and then the implementation will be able to do these things. So what's the power here? I can start with one tool like Helm. Helm is a templated tool, has variables, it understands the Kubernetes API, and maybe I can distribute my own templates with a little bit of data to match. Great. But guess what if I want to do something else like patch the results? Today, that means since Helm is infrastructure as code, I got to go change Helm. I got to change the template, this if statement. I have to do a lot of things. And you have to do it in the templating language that they've chosen. When you treat infrastructure as data, I can take the output of Helm because it's going to be in the Kubernetes configuration language, often expressed as JSON or YAML, and I can just pipe it to another tool and then just treat it as the normal data. So if the other tool wants to change the container image, I don't have to parse any code. I can just go to that data field, update it, and then check it into some repository. So now all the tools can be interchanged out and we all agree on a common data format. So then it changes the thinking. Infrastructure is data. Now all the tools can be represented. We can talk about data ownership versus dry runs on how this script is going to run.
So my wild idea after I heard this was we have deployed with some clients the model ops based on Kubeflow. Like we have made like these GitOps pipes in order to do model ops. And my first idea when I heard you talking about this concept was, so it's highly probable that we're gonna end up having something like Kubeflow as a manager of our free infrastructure, and we're just gonna deploy our YAMLs on a part, and the whole flow is gonna start checking and deploy our infrastructure at the end.
And the key there is, even though I think when we say YAML, so some people have a bad experience with YAML. They just cringe and say, oh my God, YAML, how do I manage all these YAML files? But the thing is, the analogy here is like when you do programming like Python or Golang, each of those languages have some bytecode underneath. And a lot of times that bytecode will probably generate some assembly that it has to deal with, right? No one talks about assembly language because no one interacts with it directly. It makes system calls on your behalf. So no one ever walks around saying, oh, I don't like the x86 assembly, unless you work at that level. But most people that write programs in higher level languages don't think about it. Kubernetes, the configuration YAML, is the assembly language of Kubernetes. It's the lowest layer data representation of intent. So Helm is one tool. You may use a web UI as a different tool. It doesn't matter what tool you put at the layer. Remember, we're very early in the Kubernetes ecosystem right now. So the only tools we see are your editor editing the assembly directly. There's going to be more powerful tools. And guess what? If you follow the way Kubernetes thinks about things, they're also going to represent what they do as data. So yes, we're going to have various tools that, like, for example, Kubeflow can be complex if you just try to take it as is. Now you have an opportunity to put one more layer on the top. Now you have a couple of choices. You can put a web UI there, but I would encourage you to think about the data model where people can get things done using your tool. And then if you have the data model first, that means I can use the same tools that I use to manipulate everything else in Kube, and I can just put a UI on top of the data model in any programming language I want, iPhone app, web browser, and it will generate the same data and submit to your system.
That's shocking. Like, it really solves a lot of the issues, and I mean, the Kubernetes environment. I feel that in the last 8 months, it's starting to become this religious tool fight against people, and this is what it's separating us right now inside the community. So I feel that this data configuration as data, it actually turns down all this barrier that the same community was building inside. So that's why I feel it's so powerful. And thank you very much. I think we will start looking on it, and I hope we're gonna do an episode here on devcast.live about that, because I really feel that this is something that all the companies have tried to do this in different ways, but it always makes the barrier of the tool. Yeah, so Google with their deployment manager, yeah, all the companies had their own and tried to do it as open as they could, but we always had that layer that made us marry with technology. And with these, we're abstracting from that, and we're just going to deploy what we need to deploy. And the pipe is the one that is going to talk with the tools. So I feel that we're finally going to have something that we can collaborate with, because it's very difficult to collaborate on the infrastructure side in between different sysadmins, just because one sysadmin is using a different tool from another. So that already makes you incompatible with in between them. So I think this concept is gonna transgress the whole enterprise, how we're working and how we're collaborating on the infrastructure side.
I couldn't agree more.
Okay, I think my last one would be something that I really liked was on May 2018. Cube KubeBird was came out as a way to deploy virtual machines inside a Kubernetes cluster. And in that moment, when we saw that, we thought, okay, we finally got rid of that layer of virtualization, and we're going to all hop on Kubernetes, and everything's going to be smoother. But 2 years after that deploy, yeah, almost 2 years after that, I still seeing the industry is not going on that pace yet. KubeBird is not as famous as I was expecting, and in this moment, everyone is having like two environments: the containerized one and the virtual machine one, and that's what is happening right now in the industry. Like, how do you feel about that? Do you think that we're gonna end up virtualizing inside containers, or this is gonna keep going like a struggle that we're fighting on?
Yeah, so you got to think at the higher level. Nobody cares, right? When I go to GCP, I use gcloud create VM, kubectl apply container. I don't care if it's Kubernetes as the control plane. So we got to be careful not to mix up the data plane versus the control plane. The control plane for Kubernetes today, there's one built in for creating containers and deploying them, the scheduler and all that. Some people want to create a control plane that can create virtual machines. Fairly easy to do, right? You say, hey, create some data model, what it means that I want a virtual machine, and you create a control loop that knows how to create a virtual machine. Great. That's a new control plane. So Kubernetes can be used to make universal control planes because it's just a data model plus a control loop. You can build whatever you want. The majority of people don't care, because what value is that? So there could be one kind of value. It would be nice, instead of saying gcloud compute instance create and a bunch of flags, to be able to just make one YAML file with those attributes and say, all right, here, give me 3 of these. And then it keeps those 3 forever. I never have to run the tool, come back and check it. That's the value of the Kubernetes piece. The fact that it can do that is less interesting than what it allows people to do. And guess what? If we work at a cloud provider, people will just say, where's the UI? And where's the command line tool? Even though all of that is happening underneath the covers. So I think for you and people like us on the call, we are very much the implementers of these ideas and technologies, but we have to be very careful that the person that's building freeways is very excited about the new reflector, right? It's going to cause less accidents. They're going to be like, man, this is the new technology, and I'm just going to drive right by it. Right? So you got to make sure that we know what level. So I think the fact that Kubernetes is becoming a universal control plane, you saw with VMware, right? VMware just announced the ability that they're going to use Kubernetes as a control plane for creating containers and VMs. So in their world, you are starting to see this. But guess what? I bet you that the 500,000 customers they have, will not care that Kubernetes is there if they get some value where they can do declarative deployments of containers and VMs.
Sure, sure. Okay. Diego, do you have something else for us?
Yeah, yeah. So when when I met Daniel, he was all about cloud, and I'm actually a web developer. And after we started this podcast, I got interested in the subject, so I started kind of trying to learn a little bit more about it because I wanted to ask him questions about this subject. And I ended up checking this course on Udacity about Kubernetes from this guy, Kelsey Hightower. So yours was the first course I took on Kubernetes in general, and yeah, that was the start of my self learning process. So at the beginning of this conversation, you mentioned you were a self-taught developer back then. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, about your process?
Yeah, so I didn't go to college at all. So I started picking up these skills as needed, right? So, right out of high school, I started a small computer company just in Atlanta where I kind of went through high school. And I was 18, I decided to just open a very small, build computers for people, kind of break fix kind of thing. And I had some small IT services that me and a few people I hired went out to companies to, install the printers and that kind of thing. And then eventually I started to understand that some stuff you need to automate. You can't just buy everything. And that's when I started to get into things like shell scripting. And just like a lot of people who are also self taught, you just go to the bookstore. I was going to Barnes and Noble at that time, and I would just buy in the books and I would read these books 5 and 6 times, go to the examples. And it took me a while, right? Like the concept of a for loop, just looking at it, you're like, how is this going to even work? And you're almost frozen that you don't even want to type it in because you just can't reason about it in your own head. And I just started adding more skills to the tool belt over time. So when I was working at Puppet, we had a project where we were putting or helping put Puppet on Juniper switches in their networking gear so that they can actually use Puppet to configure it. And I remember learning as much as I could about Juniper switches and routers. I even got a few, started learning all the commands, learning IPv6, how to debug and troubleshoot. And I spent at least a year going as deep as I could. And guess what? I get to retain that knowledge going forward. So over the last, I would say 15, 16 years, whether I'm writing Haskell, I learned Haskell just enough to contribute to an open source project. I've done Python. I've done Ruby when I was at Puppet. I've done Golang. I've contributed to the Golang standard library. And I just learned skills as needed when the time comes. And I think that's what being self-taught is all about.
That's great. In order to start contributing to open source projects, how long did you wait? How long did you wait in order to feel comfortable with your current knowledge? Was it hard for you? Because I know it's hard for me and for a lot of people to really acknowledge that you handle a subject and you're capable of showing what you know and helping others. What's your process there?
Yeah, so I think that's a very human thing. So I think coming up through high school, I had the benefit of being somewhat popular. And that gives you a degree of confidence. I played sports, and this ability to understand that you can meet new people and not be afraid to express yourself, because meeting new people is a form of vulnerability. You don't know them, they don't know you. Are you going to say something stupid or not? So having that exercise, maybe when I was a bit younger, gave me a lot of confidence to say, there's a new project I'm going to try. Now, you're right. It can be very overwhelming to understand what a pull request is, how to run their unit tests, especially if you're not familiar with the programming language. Someone may laugh at you, that kind of things. But I'm okay if someone's laughing at me because I know the power of learning now, right? Learning in public, it's okay not to know everything because once you do know it, you add it to the belt. So I think one of the ways is, number one, we talked about community early in the show. You can create the kind of community that helps people get over that hump or fear. So when you see someone say, hey, I'm new here, I would like to contribute, not that everyone's going to have time to hold their hand through the process, but when you get a chance to do that, you now created a new contributor who is going to understand that maybe they can do it too. The other thing I think I did was be very patient. I remember contributing to the Go standard library for the first time. So this is, I had plenty of experience contributing to open source projects at this point. So when Go came out, I was like, there was one feature that I wanted. So after a few years of using Go, I really got tired of writing the basic auth header thing, right? You go and parse the header, and then this is where you put it in the right place. It's like, this is so tedious. Why is it not in the standard library? So the Go process, man, they were using this weird review tool, the way you have to do, it was so much work just getting the issue filed and getting off the ground. And I just said, let me just start with the smallest thing I can. And then I remember issuing my change request, and Rob Pike did my review. So for those that don't know who Rob Pike is a legend in the computing space, and he's also one of the original founders of the Golang project. So this person jumps on and just like, okay. And he just went through the longest code review ever. And it was like, you need to check this. You can't allocate on the stack here. You need to have tests for this. Oh yeah, you need some tests over here, even though you didn't touch that part. Da 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 da. I'm looking like, wow, I just hit a brick wall. Should I just give up? But the thing that I understood is Rob was teaching me. He was teaching me how the project works. He was teaching me the style. He was giving me so much of himself that the least I could do was take it and just be patient. He didn't say get it done tomorrow. He was very patient. And I got all the things done, went through a few rounds, and then it got merged into the standard library. So I think it's one of these things as a contributor, you have to understand that people are investing their time in you, and you have to do is equal work and invest your time in being patient, listening, banging your head against the wall, and then you'll eventually get there.
Just awesome. Those wise words and your whole story, it's really inspiring. And in all of that you mentioned, you mentioned these words, it's okay not to know a thing. And Daniel can confirm that that's been our motto for a lot of years, especially with the groups, the developer groups. And that's what we are trying to make people understand. It's a whole process. It's a long road, and we are all walking that road. It's okay
Yeah.
not
So
to
for
know.
listeners, when I got the most confident is when I understood that I could tell people that I don't know something. That's when I was the most confident. I wasn't confident pretending just that I knew everything and tried to avoid conversations where I didn't. I've done some keynotes like this in the past. I was at ChefConf, HashiConf, and I remember learning a new technology the night before and deciding to do like a presentation on what I just learned working with the core teams at those companies. And they were coming out with these new products. And I was like, you know what? Like I remember when Chef came out with this new tool called Habitat. And I was going to give just like a standard Kubernetes keynote. But I was like, it'd be much more interesting is showing Habitat working with Kubernetes. So that means I had to learn it enough that I can do my own deployment, learn what it was decent at, and then sitting down with some of the maintainers that worked at Chef. And I remember getting my keynote updated, stayed up a little late that night. But then the keynote the next day was really nice. I was showing people, says, hey, we just heard Habitat get announced the day before. Look, I'm new. I just learned this last night, so I'm not going to be an expert, but I think the value I can add is what it's like for a beginner who knows Kubernetes but doesn't know Habitat to try to use them together and just go through it live, nice and slow. But people in the audience really appreciated the ground zero, then moving up very nicely to show all the details. And then it ended up being a very powerful keynote.
Great. Listen, you're our first guest here in this podcast, and I hope we can get you soon again because, uh, as you told us right at the beginning, we can talk about everything that we can think of, and not only cloud. And you showed us that that's right. You have great insights in the developer community, and your whole process in this adventure is really helpful for everyone that's listening. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Kelsey. One last request that I have, and it's we're hosting the Dev Fest of Mexico in the following week. I'm gonna give a talk about Istio there, but I would really appreciate if we can open with a greeting from you. So I don't know if you can record as a small greeting to the Dev Fest Mexico. It doesn't have to be in Spanish, but I think it would give us like a strong go on that beginning of that Dev Fest.
I think what we should do is, yes, let's see if we can just do something live, where I can just have a video recording set up somewhere and I can just, just see the audience and just say, hey, and maybe show a small demo of something I'm working, just something nice, something special just for that.
Wow,
Wow.
that sounds great. That sounds great. So yeah, we're definitely doing that.
Email me, we'll work out the details.
Yeah, we will do that offline. But yeah, thank you very much, Kelsey, for your time. Diego, thank you very much for connecting from Amsterdam. I hope you're doing well there. This is
Thank you for setting this up. It was great.
Yeah, I think we're gonna keep developing these subjects in the following episodes. But thank you very much, guys, for your time. This is DevFest.live.